Well, welcome back. We're here again to talk about the Mount Ebal inscription, and we're talking with Dr. Peter van der Veen and Dr. Scott Stripling, and we're going to find out, well, what does this inscription actually say? Who'd like to tackle that?
I'm going to let my epigrapher handle that one. What's it say, Peter?
What we do have is a clear formula which may be found several times on the inscription, inside as well as outside. It is actually saying, "Cursed by El Yahu, you will die, you will surely die." There are several mentions of curse. There are several mentions of death, you will die. Several mentions probably of Yahu and El. It's interesting because the writer changes the direction of writing over and over again. He's not paying attention to a very proper style, which also shows that for him it was very clear that the tablet was to be folded and then it was to be put on the altar. It was not to be read by anybody else except by God. Yes. So actually sometimes even the letters are found written over each other. It almost becomes sort of a mystical text. We do have the formula, "You will die, cursed by El Yahu," something along these lines. It's not always clear in which word order because we don't have word dividers, yeah, which is a general problem with proto-alphabetic inscriptions. Where do you cut the words? That we have something like "You will surely die," "You're cursed by El Yahu," there can be very little doubt about that. The question is only, how often do we find it? We have a problematic central fold. Some of this, what we are seeing in the scans, maybe scratches and not letters, so we have to be a little bit careful how often the formula is found. The formula is definitely found, yes.
And was there anything else at the site that gives you an idea of the dating? Because I know Adam Zertal was suggesting it was 1200 BC, which would be not according to the biblical date. So what other finds have you found at that site?
Well, let me just say there's several ways we would date. The epigraphy is the one we've been talking about, but we also have archaeological context, and that's your question. Zertal dated the site from the mid-13th century to the mid-12th century, more or less. He had about 97% Iron Age 1 pottery and about 3% Late Bronze Age pottery, which he dated to the end of the Late Bronze Age. We've gone back and done a reanalysis of that pottery and additional pottery that we recovered from our expedition, and I think proven, and now are publishing, that pottery no longer existed at the end of LB2, but it did exist at the beginning of LB2. So we're saying in general it's a Late Bronze II date, 1400 to 1200. Both Peter and I believe that it's at the very beginning of LB2. Some of our other colleagues believe that it's at the end of LB2. Even if it were at the end, this is still older than any Hebrew text ever found by a couple of hundred years. And if it's where we think it is, then it's much, much older, dating back to the time of Joshua himself. So when people talk about, well, you know, they didn't find this in context, it was out of the dump pile and so forth, you only have two choices at Mount Ebal: Late Bronze II and Iron Age 1. Those are your only two choices. So regardless, it's older than anything that's ever been found. And certainly with the name Yahweh or Yahu, that's many hundreds of years older than any previous mention that we have.
There is something to add to this. Actually, Adam Zertal already discovered two scarabs, which were then dated by a colleague of his to the 13th century BC. Which is quite surprising because one of the scarabs actually contains the cartouche, the royal name of Pharaoh Thutmose III, which is the most important pharaoh of the 18th dynasty around 1450 BC. Naturally, this name is found on scarabs throughout the centuries because he was an important pharaoh to remember. But Daphne Ben-Tor and I myself, we have been looking for parallel evidence for these scarabs, and we actually came across very good parallels that clearly date these scarabs to the 18th dynasty. With other words, here too, these scarabs help us date the earliest phase of the construction there to the Late Bronze Age, to the time of the 18th dynasty. I think all that together tips the balance towards about 1400 BC.
It's aligning itself then with the biblical narrative, you know, and a lot of what Patterns of Evidence has done is been looking, well, patterns of evidence where God has been acting in history. Here, what you're seeing is this amazing pattern. At the site where the biblical account of Joshua building an altar, and the blessings and the curses are happening. What they did is they divided the 6 tribes on one side. We'll show a picture of what this looks like. The 2 faces of these mountains facing each other, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. The fact that there was a curse tablet on the cursed mountain, and there's an altar there, theologically speaking, that altar was there for the forgiveness of sins, right?
That's right. And they were also peace offerings and fellowship offerings that they offered on the site. But the bottom line is the shedding of innocent blood to cover the guilty. The curse is introduced in Genesis 3, and that's the same time that animal sacrifice is introduced in Genesis 3. And that theme runs all the way through the Bible, the shedding of innocent blood to cover the guilty. It was through that process at Mount Ebal, in this 2-by-2 meter round altar, that the nation was born. They entered, they reaffirmed the Abrahamic covenant, and from there, it was going to be whatever they made of it. That was that critical reaffirmation.
Let's just talk a little bit about what happened when this was released to the archaeological world. But I'm going to do a cliffhanger. We're going to talk about that when we come back.